Discovery class, good morning. Happy New Year. We begin together the year 2022. Let me read you something. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Do you know who said that? Mark. He was the writer of the second gospel. Mark chapter 4, verse 37. As we begin our new year together as a class, I wonder what squalls you and I are going to face this year. If we do get caught in a storm, how do we get out of it? Better yet, are we the only ones that are in that storm? Are there others along with us? Sometimes we get into storms of our own making. Either we didn't hear the weather report, or we opted to ignore it. Sometimes we go to places that we shouldn't go. And if we do, we may pay a very high price for our stupidity. I read about a lady that reminded me of that. She went skiing up a mountain with her husband. Have you ever gone skiing? Our family did. Now, there are 5 in our family. There's Mary and I and our 3 kids. We don't live very far from the Rocky Mountains. And in the wintertime, we took our car, the old station wagon, and the 5 of us would load in, and away we would go to the ski resort. Now, around Calgary, we've got some of the finest ski resorts you'd find anywhere in the world. They're only an hour, maybe an hour and a half drive from my house. Banff, Lake Louise, Sunshine Village, Mount Norquay, Kananaskis, on and on it goes. All of our skiing equipment, we bought at the garage sale. Well, that's all I could afford. We bought skis, poles, boots, leggings, jackets, mitts, goggles. And with my size family and my tiny budget, we had to squeeze it and make it work. That was our way of beating the system. Now, you may not know it, but the difficulty on the slopes of those ski runs are colored. Green, if you see green on a sign, that's an easy run. And then over here, if you see a blue run, that means it's a little more difficult. It's for the intermediate skier. But if you see a sign that's painted black, that is for the very best skiers. That's the most difficult. But also, it's almost straight down. My kids, after a time, would make me go behind them down that black slope. And I'm telling you, class, I can't understand why I'm still alive. Now, back to my story. A lady went skiing up the mountain, and keep in mind, you get to the top of the ski slope by taking a chairlift. You wait in line. Other skiers are there behind you. The chair on the lift will often hold 2. Sometimes it'll hold 3. We even have now ski slopes that have 4. As the skiers approach the boarding zone, an attendant standing there, he will assist you getting on and sitting in the chair. Now, you must remember, it's very frosty. And of course, usually the temperature is around -10, -15. Sometimes there's a wind blowing. Remember, you're up on a mountain. Everything was in place for that lady that day as she approached the lift chair, taking her ride up that slope. She got in line, took her place, sat in the chair, up she went. It was then that she remembered something. She needed a restroom. Why didn't I go at the bottom of the hill, she said to herself. Assured that there would be a restroom at the top of the lift, she gritted her teeth. She and her bladder endured that bouncy ride up the side of that mountain, only to find that at the top of the mountain, There was no facility where she got off. She began to panic. What do I do? Her husband, who was riding with her, got an idea. He said, well, look, why don't you just go over there in the woods? They were right next to the hill. You could go over there and you could hide. Now, just as an aside, men, if you have a wife that can freshen up in the bush, you've got a treasure. I got a treasure in my wife. Well, this lady was wearing an all-white ski outfit. Her ski suit would blend right into the snow. Talk about a powder room. Nobody would ever see her. She had it made. There in the spruce tree, she skied deep into the trees, about 100 yards. No one could see her. She got comfortable in her sitting position. She removed the bottom of her ski outfit. Now that's the good news. The bad news, she was not told to remove her skis. There was still a gentle slope on the side of that mountain. Before she knew it, she was streaking backwards across the open slope, revealing more than she intended, I think. And with arms failing and her skis sailing, she sped under the very lift that she had just ridden. She collided in a heap in a pile of pylons, and she scrabbled like mad to cover all her essentials, only to discover that she had a broken arm. Well, her husband watched her doing all this, and he raced to her rescue. He signaled the ski patrol, please come over and give us a hand. They transported her down the slopes into an ambulance to the hospital. As she was treated in emergency care at the hospital, a man was wheeled in on a gurney just next to her. And he was in serious pain. His leg was in a brace, and he had broken his leg. After a time, they both gained their composure, and they were able to air some pleasantries and some humor. And she said to him, so, how did you hurt your leg? He said to her, well, you know, it was the craziest thing. I was riding up on the ski lift, and then suddenly, right in front of me, I couldn't believe it, there was this crazy lady. She was skiing backwards, full speed, half dressed, and I leaned over to get a better look. And before I knew it, I slipped off my chair. I didn't realize how far I'd moved, and I fell right off the lift. Then he turned to her, and he said, so, how did you break your arm? Let me read for you the text again. Mark 4:35. Late that day, Jesus said to his disciples, let's go across the lake, over to the other side. So they took Jesus in the boat, and they left. A huge storm came up. Waves poured into the boat, threatening to sink it. Jesus was in the stern, head on a pillow, and sleeping. They roused him, saying, Teacher, wake up. Teacher, is it nothing to you that we're going down, we're going to drown. Awakened, Jesus told the wind to pipe down. And then he spoke to the sea. Quiet. Settle down. The wind ran out of its breath, and the sea became just as smooth as glass. Jesus turned to his disciples and reprimanded them. Why are you guys such cowards? Don't you have any faith in me at all? The disciples were in absolute awe. They were staggered. Who is this anyway? They asked. The wind and the sea at his beck and call. Well, class, we all make mistakes, don't we? We go into the bush. We don't take our skis off. We head out in a boat. We don't have any weather report. We go where we shouldn't go. You and I are still in the midst of a worldwide pandemic. It's right here as we begin the year 2022. Have you got your shot? So have I. Have you got your second shot? So have I. Have you got your third shot? I did too. So what? We're still locked up. You have to register to come to our church. We can only hold so many. Attendance is determined by the square footage of your auditorium. If our auditorium is this big, this is how many we can have. In our church, we're only allowed 150. We have to distance. We have to mask. We have to sanitize. Can't touch. Remain in small groups. Take-home kits are now distributed freely in our city of Calgary. You can line up at any drugstore and they'll give them to you for nothing. They usually come in a box, and there's 5 to a box. Haven't got mine yet, but I will. They're self-analyzing. We can be our own doctors, in other words. We can check to see whether or not we've got the virus. Now, having said that, what do we do? The nation of Holland, the Dutch, they can only have 2 people in their house this year over Christmas. They're in complete lockdown. The virus over there is rampant. I don't think there's any country in Europe as bad as the poor people in Holland. The French have said to the English, don't travel to France. Don't come across the channel. Don't take the ferry, and don't, for goodness sakes, fly in. We don't need you here. We are under quarantine. We have no place to treat you because our hospitals are full. If you get sick, I'm afraid we can't help you any. Well, Canada, we're the same. We've closed our borders. Right next door is the University of Calgary. They can't write their final semesters this quarter because they're under quarantine. Their classrooms have been closed. It's too dangerous to be together in a room, all of you. So what do? They complete their exams online. That's part of the shutdown. Wouldn't you like to climb a mountain again? Wouldn't you like to put on your skis and go for a ski? I want to take another nasty spill, wouldn't you? Who cares if the world laughs at me? I don't mind. I laugh at myself all the time. At my age, is there anybody in here that's listening in my class that hasn't been bruised or they haven't been embarrassed? Some years ago, a university professor accompanied a group of mountain climbers on an expedition up the mountain. And he made a very interesting observation. You know what he found? Changing weather change moods. If it was overcast, his climbers, they'd grumble with each other and then get mad. But if the sky was clear, the climbers were happy. He found they were very energetic, and they were even cooperative. When the gray clouds hid their view of the mountain, the climbers were sullen, and they became very selfish. Well, that's you and me. Some things happen to us. Have you taken your eyes off the Lord lately? When you're in the middle of the storm? When you peer at God's majesty, do you find that you've got a bounce in your step? When your eyes are focused on Him, do you have a grin on your face? But when you focus on the stumbling blocks under your feet, have you noticed that everything shuts down? In the midst of this pandemic, all of us have stumbling blocks under our feet. I think Paul, the Apostle Paul, he had it right in Colossians 3, 1 and 2. Don't shuffle along, eyes to the ground, absorbed with things right in front of you. Look up. Be alert to the things that are going on in Christ's kingdom. That's where the action is. Start seeing things when you remove the clouds, and you'll have a brand new perspective. The psalmist, he said the same thing, only he said it this way. Psalm 34, verse 3. Oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. Magnify. That's a nice word. It's a verb. It means to enlarge. Take your eyes off the mess around you, it says, and enlarge your awareness. It means understand that the Lord is better, and what he's doing for you, you're going to find is still far better. When you take your mind off yourself, the psalmist says that's when you start to magnify the Lord. You suddenly find yourself right in the middle of the Lord's Prayer. Remember the Lord's Prayer? Thy kingdom come. Thine is the kingdom. Thine is the power. Thine is the glory. It's then that the Message Bible says, you can do anything you want. You're ablaze in beauty. I like that. I told you about Jesus' authority. He's in a boat. He's crossing the Sea of Galilee. A storm comes up. Suddenly the placid sea becomes violent. The disciples, now remember, some of them are seasoned fishermen. These are not rookies. They panic. Monstrous waves pound the boat. It begins to take on water. Mark describes it in verse 37 of chapter 4. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. That was not a big boat, class. It was no match for 10-foot waves. It plunged headfirst into a wall of water, dangerously tipping over. And the vessel pitched forward into that valley of another wave, and those panicked hands clutched the mast. Wide-eyed, screaming voices, desperate prayer. You turn and look at the back of the boat, and there's Jesus, curled in the stern, sound asleep. How could anyone sleep in the midst of this? It's a hurricane. Teacher, they screamed. Don't you care if we drown? Everyone listening to me has said that. Don't you care? You said that? In these troubled times, put your mask on. Don't you care? Keep your distance. Don't come near. Don't you care? Aren't you vaccinated? You're not? Don't you care? Are you not allowed to come over? No, you're not. Well, don't you care? Everyone around me is protected, but you're not protected. Don't you care? We've all said that. How could Jesus sleep through a storm? Class, it's easy. Do you know why he could sleep through the storm? Because he was in charge of it. That storm belonged to him. He was the boss of the storm. He's also the boss of this pandemic. He's also the boss of all your troubles. The Bible says he got up, he rebuked the wind, he said to the waves, quiet, quiet, be still. Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. Jesus said to the disciples, why are you so afraid? Don't you have any faith in me? The raging water becomes a calm mill pond. Instantly, those churning waters now become peaceful. What was the reaction of the disciples? Verse 41. They were in absolute awe, the Bible says, staggered. Who is this? Anyway, they asked. The wind and the sea at his beck and call. Never before had they met a man quite like this. Do you think Jesus would let your boat go down and sink if he were on board? Before he was done with the disciples, remember this is the early part of his 3-year ministry on earth. In the next 3 years in his ministry, they would see fish jumping into the boat. They would see demons plunge into pigs and run into the sea. They would see cripples turn into dancers. They would see lepers move into the finest neighborhoods. They would see tax collectors welcomed back into the synagogue. They would see a child that had died become living and breathing again. They would watch a prostitute become the president of the Ladies' Society in their little village. He even gives orders to the evil spirits and they obey him, says Matthew 1:27. These disciples knew what Jesus meant when he said, thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. 2 of the fishermen on that boat that day, in that storm, would later write these words. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. John 1:4-4. Jesus has gone into heaven and at God's right hand, he's ruling over angels, he's ruling over authorities, and he's ruling with all power. 1 Peter 3:22. Jesus declared his authority. He wants you to do the same, class. When our sky clears from that storm, he wants you to repeat these words. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. He wants you to say that. God's waiting to hear your praise. He deserves it. You need to give it. Back in 1862, the setting was the American Civil War. The location was Harrison Landing in Virginia. There were 2 armies fighting in that valley across that ravine. On the north side was the Union Army. On the south side was the Confederates. They were related. It was the American Civil War. They were fighting among themselves in that nation in that year. In Harrison Landing, there in Virginia, the Confederate Army was on that one high slope, bordering the two ridges. During the night, Captain Ellicott, who was the captain of the Union Army, he heard some loud moans. They were the moans of a soldier who lay severely wounded there on the battlefield. Not knowing if it was a Union or a Confederate soldier, the captain decided to risk his life and to bring that stricken man back to medical attention on his side. He crawled on his stomach through the gunfire in the darkness, and he came to the stricken man, and he said to him, "Be still. I'm going to pull you back to safety. Just be still." And he took him by the collar, and he pulled him as fast and as hard as he could, as quiet as he could. When the captain finally reached his own lines, the soldier had become very quiet. And the reason he had quietened down is because he had died. And then when he lit a lantern and he looked, he found that it was not one of his own soldiers. It was a Confederate soldier. It was the enemy that he had pulled back for help in his own line. But the story doesn't end there. As he looked more carefully, do you know what Captain Ellingham saw? He peered into the face of his own son. His son, who lived in the North with him before the war, was a musician. And he had gone south to train in one of the southern universities in their music program. He hadn't talked to his son in a long time. But in the midst of his studies at the university in music, he joined the Confederate Army, unbeknownst to the father. And now, here on the battlefield, with the moans and groans that he heard in the darkness of the night, he crawled on his belly, and he found this soldier, and he pulled him back to safety, but he died on the way back. And then as he looked carefully, to his horror, there he peered into the face of his own son. He said to those other military leaders around him in the tent that night, he said, "In the morning, let's give this soldier full military rights. Let's bury him as if he's one of ours. And we'll give him every right that belongs to him, even though he's not us, he's our enemy." And then he said to the bugler, he said, "Do you think you could read this music? I found it in the pocket of the young soldier. He had written this music, and I wonder if you could play it for me." And the bugler looked at it and he said, "Yes, I can play that for you." So he did. Class, do you know what that bugler played? That was the first rendition of The Last Post. When you go to a military cemetery, to a funeral, or on Remembrance Day, or here in Ottawa when we have our celebration of our memorial service, at every one of those services is played the taps. And the taps is really another word for the last post. And when that is played, everybody puts their hand on their heart, because it's a reminder of a soldier that has given his supreme sacrifice for his country and for his people. That day, on that morning, Captain Ellicombe heard first time the post played on behalf of his son, but it was written by his son. A serious squall had come up, and it almost swamped the boat. In the case of Captain Ellicombe, he gave to the world perhaps one of the greatest gifts you and I could ever receive. Jesus played the last post there on that boat in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, in the middle of a storm. And you know, he'll play your last post. We're in the middle of a storm. There's not much we can do about it. Is this thing going to last? Could. Some think it could be another 2 more years before we're out of this. Really doesn't matter. When Jesus is on board the boat, I don't care how bad the storm is, it is not going to go down because he won't let it. Well, I see the clock on the wall has passed. My time is up. Thank you for joining me on this first time in our first class, 2022. Will I see you next week? I hope so. I'm going to be looking for you. Please come back.